Welcome everyone to Rising Out of the Chrysalis Stories That Inspire with Marissa Grace, where we share life stories of struggle and triumph, not only of my own life experiences, but also through the experiences of my own guests, as a way to help you have breakthroughs and find hope in your own life. Welcome everyone. I'm Marissa Grace, and today I have a very special guest, Callum Schofield. Welcome, Callum.
Hi, thank you for inviting me onto the show. I'm very excited to be here speaking to you.
Absolutely. No, Callum, you have a very interesting story. And it started about the age of 4 or 5 years old, where you developed the stutter that really has impacted your life. So why don't you tell us about how it all started and, to where you got to today?
Yeah, so as you said, it started when I was about 4 or 5, where I developed a stutter, which can also sometimes be called a stammer in countries such as the UK and Australia. And it's basically a speech impediment, which either comes out in the form of blocks or elongation or repetition. And quite, I think 7% of children develop it, but only around 2 or 3% actually go on to live to have a stutter for the rest of their lives, really. So people with stutter is a minority. And growing up as a child, I didn't see myself as any different or out of the ordinary for the first few years, because I didn't have that concept of what normal was. I didn't have that concept of what different was. It was only when I started to get a little bit older, age 9, 10, that I really started to become conscious that I had something about me that my friends didn't have. And I had something that held me back, as when all my friends are talking freely what's on their mind, I was struggling to get my words out. And then that started with a little anxiety, just noticing that I'm not the same, noticing that I can't do things as well as my friends. And then that built up over my school years to really hold me back, to the point that I would struggle to get a sentence out without stuttering. I would struggle to have a conversation with someone who I didn't know. I would never volunteer to answer a question in school. Speaking to anyone who I thought had authority over me, or I felt judged by, or I felt that they were more important than me, which, due to the low self-esteem that I'm stutter brings to with quite a lot of people, then my speech would be so much worse. So overall, I was really struggling to speak. I mean, this had quite a profound impact on me in my latter stages of life after school. As I passed all my exams, but I didn't feel like I could go to university. I felt as I was working in McDonald's full time once I finished my school years, and I thought that's all I would amount to. I thought that this is what I can achieve. I thought I'd have to accept the fact that I could never say my own name. I thought I'd have to accept the fact that I'll never be able to say what I want to say, that I'll always be not as good as my friends, not as good as the people around me, not as good as my colleagues that we see on TV. And at the age of 18, thinking that this is all you're worth and accepting the fact that you're stuck in this rut was a very hard thing to comprehend. And it was very upsetting to be hit with as well at that time. I think, to think that your life is practically over at 18, thinking that you're not going to amount to anything, is a horrible thought. But luckily, I came across a speech program called the Stutters Project. It's a course where you travel to a hotel, spend 4 days there, and they teach you a technique. But it's not just about the technique to address the physical aspect of having a stutter. It's about the mindset. It's about accepting the fact that you have a stutter. It's about embracing it. It's about showing that just because you have a stutter, there's nothing you can't do, And that's the first time I've been exposed to people who have overcome the fear of stuttering, people who live their life to the fullest with a stutter, people who talk openly about their stutter. And that was so overwhelming. I think the situation of being surrounded by people who stutter, like me, who understand what I'm going through, who've been there themselves, was such a pivotal moment, really. And I was just very fortunate to have found this speech course at the age of 18, so I could sort of turn my life around pretty early on to get to a point of where I am now. So that's sort of a very brief overview of the last few years or so.
So, around that age, 4 or 5, when you developed the stutter, now, did you have the stutter before that age? Usually children develop language around the age of 2 and so forth. So it's not until they have the full language together that we start noticing any gaps. So, was there anything noticeable before the age of 5?
Not that I'm aware of. I know I did attend speech therapy as a young child around that age. Whether that was because of my stutter, I'm not sure. I don't think there was any sort of gaps in my language development as such, or my sort of my intellectual development either. I don't think there was anything prominent or to show. It more just happened. And that's a frustrating thing with having a stutter, that there's no real known cause of it. No one really knows why people stutter. No one really knows the science behind it, and there's no cure for it. So that's why it's very frustrating, because you don't know where it's come from. You've got no real way of knowing where it's come from or why it's come to you of all people, but you do know that you can't get rid of it. And with the wrong mindset, that's quite a not very nice combination, not knowing why you got it and knowing you can't get rid of it.
And once you started school, how long did it take? That's around the age you start school, 4 or 5. And is that when, who first noticed that you had this difficulty with the speech? Was it like the school? Was it your family?
It's hard to say. Just at that age, I don't think it was really addressed as such, because the last thing you want to do is say to a child and to identify that there's something different about them that your perspective believes is going to hold them back or is going to give them challenges. But I would definitely say my family were aware. I remember the school being more aware as I got into my latter stages of what we call primary school and what we call elementary school. I know the school were aware and understanding in that sense, but I will imagine that it was my family who first became aware of it, but because they became aware of it at such a young age, it's never been a big thing for my family, for my parents, my grandparents, aunties, uncles, those around me. It's always been there, so it's just part of me. So it's never really been a big thing to them.
So they just accepted the way Callum is as part of being you. But as you entered into school and now you have all your friends kind of noticing, what did they like? Did your friends at school kind of point it out to you, or was it more you being aware that, hey, I'm different from everybody? Maybe, there's something wrong with me.
Again, I was quite lucky in my early childhood that the group of friends in the class I had, they saw me from the beginning as well, so it was never really a big thing because they were used to it. But so I became more self-aware, and it was the interaction with children from other classes who weren't aware of stuttering, weren't aware that Callum had a stutter. And some of them were quite negative interactions that, had lasting effects on me. Had effects that there was a time I remember there was a certain student who would always ask me what my name was. And I just thought at the time I was quite naive. I thought that he must have just been quite forgetful because he keeps asking me my name, but in reality, it's because I would always stutter very badly on my name. So I couldn't say Callum for 18 years. So this boy would be constantly making me say my name, and then that further developed to he would be making me say words he knew I was stutter on. And it'd be, for example, I would be in the school bathrooms, and he wouldn't let me leave until he got a good laugh out of me stuttering. He would ask me to say all these different words in my name, and then only once he got or had enough of laughing at me, got bored of that entertainment, I would be allowed to leave it. And I must have been 9 or 10 at that time. So that's definitely a pivotal moment, and it's an interesting one. Like, even though that happened, it must have been say 2011, 2012. It was only in 2020 that I actually remember that happened. So for whatever reason, for nearly 10 years, I blocked that memory from my mental state. It's only recently that I actually remembered that it happened, and there's no doubt that it was that age when I was 10, 11, moving to secondary school as well, that I started to go into my shell, become more self-aware, become more anxious. So that moment was definitely one of a turning point moment, you could say.
And then, like when you around the age of 18, you said that was the first time you said your actual name, Callum, you were able to say it. What do you think drove you or helped you to be able to say your name for the first time by the age of 18?
I think I wanted to make that change. I was keeping having these moments where I was holding back. I wasn't feeling like I was enough, and it just got to the point that every day, every week, I was feeling really low about myself, feeling low about the thing I wasn't doing, feeling low about the situation I was in. So it just got to a point that enough was enough. So I went on this week off. I thought I'll show the initiative. It was absolutely terrifying in the build. Just answering the phone call from a speech course and talking to them, saying I would like a place on the course. It took me an awful lot of time to actually return the call and to speak to them, but I'm really glad I did. And once I got there, I knew I made the right decision. But it was on and I will always remember this the date. It was the 25th of September, 2019. That I said Callum Schofield for the first time without stuttering on that course. And I have no shame in saying that when I first said my name, I completely broke down in tears. It was such a momentous occasion for me. It's something that I accepted the fact I would never be able to say. I never thought I would be able to say Callum. And I just said Callum Schofield in front of a room full of people. I remember thinking at the time that no matter what happens after this moment, this is enough. I've already done something I never thought I could do. And it's more than just a name. You know, your name is who you are. It's your identity. It's something you should be proud of. So to actually say Callum, you know, no matter how many years on we are from that moment, just talk and bring back those same raw emotions that it did saying it that first time nearly 4 years ago now.
And once you realize, oh my God, this is a big moment for you that you're actually, got to say your name, you achieve this. Did it cross your mind that if I can do this, then I could probably change some of the other things too, and actually start speaking more clearly? Did it cross your mind that, there's so many possibilities that you achieve this, that you can do other things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It really did. And I think the main thing I got from that moment and from that course was hope. It gave me so much hope and potential for my future, for what I could achieve, for what potential I have as me. As it wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't I came back from this course and I was cured, but there's no cure. But it took another, say, 12 months of practicing my speech all day, every day, putting myself in these situations where I don't want to say setting myself up to fail, but myself in challenging speaking situations where I know my speech will struggle, putting myself in situations that I will feel uncomfortable in so I can move forward and progress and grow as a person. And that's still what I'm working on now. Working on your speech and working on yourself never truly stops. And it was definitely the mindset that I've now got a voice that propelled me forward. And it was only later on learning that it's not about the fluency. It's not about speaking clearly. It's about throwing myself into every situation. As if I'm chasing fluency, and if I'm expecting myself to be fluent for a speaking situation to go well, then that's setting myself up to fail in my eyes. I should be focusing on the fact I am in this speaking situation, saying what I want to say, how I want to. Whether I speak fluently, stumble, or stutter is not relevant. It's about being in that situation and saying what I want to say. Because the more you chase fluency, the more pressure you're putting on stuttering, and then you're pressing that self-destruct button really. So it's not about the fluency, which I learned later on. As after the course, initially, if I had a bad speaking situation, I would be annoyed at myself for stuttering. But now I'm very much, if I say what I want to say, that is a victory. Whether I stutter or not, that is relevant now. It's about saying what I want, when I want to.
Awesome. Now, how has this impacted you getting employment? So when you went out to get employment, a job, how has this impacted your life in that area?
I'd say initially, it made me very reluctant to apply for jobs. The jobs I applied for, initially I got turned away quite regularly. Whether this was done to my speech, who knows? I think in my head at the time it was, because that was my whole identity, was someone with a stutter. So I thought my stutter was responsible for everything wrong in my life at the time. But if you also factor in, for example, I was a student in the latter stages of my school, so my availability might not have been as much compared to someone who was available full time. There's so many different factors that could have been the reason I was turned away from various jobs, not necessarily down to my stutter. I know in interviews, for example, I would never disclose I had a stutter because I thought it was this awful, horrible thing. So instead, I would not really make sense of the words I was saying. I would pause, I would switch words, I would sound not very prepared, I would sound unprofessional rather than just say I have a stutter. So it might take me slightly longer to answer some of your questions, which would have made life so much easier. That's when I got my first job to an interview. I completely barraged my way through the interview. I then had to do a little bit of practice working with customers where with my speech again, I struggled with my speech because I didn't disclose I had a stutter, but I still somehow got the job. I'm not sure how I got that job, honestly, in hindsight, but I managed it. And then in that employment, it was, well, the two roles are working with customers and working in the kitchen behind the scenes. When everyone else around me could do everything, I was stuck in the kitchen. This was a mix of people believing I was incapable of speaking to customers. There was lots of worries and concerns about this, but also myself believing I was incapable. Because I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I had to speak to someone else. So it was definitely, I can't hold the organization or my bosses responsible at the time because I was just as much against the idea as them. But that's no excuse for not having that conversation with me. My opinion was never heard. I never expressed that I was reluctant to be in a customer-facing role. It was assumed, and that's what's not right in my opinion. But luckily, as I progress in my speech and mindset, I will always disclose in interviews. For the last 2 years before I started training to be a teacher, which I'm training as now, I worked in schools with children with special needs or additional needs or learning difficulties. And in the interview, I said, I know what it's like to be a child who is seen as different to everyone else because of my stutter. And I was sort of commended in the interview by the head teacher of the panel for sharing that, and they commented on how well I articulated myself in the interview and how I came across, and sharing that story with them. And then I ended up working in that school for 2 years and absolutely loved it. So it's definitely gone in the full circle from not wanting to tell anyone I had a stutter to now disclosing, like, on my CV, on my resumes, I talk about my stutter. I'll always mention it when I'm filling a job application now, because it's not a negative thing anymore. It's part of me.
It's who you are. Now that you come to this point where you've accepted, who you are, the way you are, it has become easier, right? And so the way you feel inside, it gets reflected outside. So because you're accepting yourself, now you find that when you go out for jobs interviews, they're accepting you as well. Where before, where you were rejecting yourself, you were also being rejected, and you were okay with it because it went along with how you felt inside. I don't want to be in a customer service because I don't feel confident enough to be in that position. The employer, they didn't want you there because they felt they had reservations about you speaking to people, but you were okay with that because it went along with how you felt inside. And it was all about everything, really. It was all about how you were feeling and how you saw yourself. Now, through all this journey, you really were impacted by this. You got very depressed. And tell us a little bit more about that emotionally, the struggle that you had dealing, being bullied at school, being picked on. But it was mostly the struggle that you had within you, accepting this.
Yeah, absolutely. But despite what I went through, being called names, being laughed at, being mocked, insulted, all this was very challenging. But there was nothing compared to what was going on in my own head. But the bottom line for me was I never felt like I was enough. I don't feel like I was enough in any sense, enough as a friend, a potential partner, a employee, or a student, anything like that. I didn't feel like I was enough. So almost, I'm not saying I wanted to fail at things, but I didn't think I deserved anything more. I thought people saw me as someone with a stutter who won't go very far, and it's not nice. Then when you're making these friendships, these relationships, and you're still not feeling enough, then that impacts on them. It impacts on how you feel with the people around you. The people like your friends who you should trust more than anyone. I felt like I couldn't be open with them, but I didn't feel good enough to be with them. I didn't feel wanted, and no one made me feel that way. It's the complete opposite of what the situation was, but that was how I felt, really. And I think I was almost used to being overlooked. As someone with a stutter, you are overlooked for a lot of times in your life, whether that's in school, someone else has chosen to speak instead of you. Whether it's in a job interview, whether it's you're deciding with your friends of who should phone up the takeaway to get them takeout food. I find that the more you're overlooked, the more your self-worth decreases. And that's not necessarily related to speech. Because obviously when I was at my low points, my speech was a lot worse. Even now, if I'm struggling with something, it's a lot more prominent because my speech will fluctuate a lot more. I mean, that's a mistake I made after the speech course, was assuming that now that I got a voice, everything would be okay. I was quite naive, thinking that, now I can say now I can use this breathing technique to speak. Nothing else will worry me, I'm untouchable. But I actually had these 18 years of anxiety and fear and the doubt. There was so much self-doubt in me, as whenever I went into a situation, I had the doubts. I had doubts about whether or not I should be in that situation, whether or not these people, I'm worthy to be their friend, whether or not I'm worthy to be in a relationship with this person, whether or not I'm worthy for this job, worthy to be enjoying myself. I at times didn't feel like I was allowed to be happy. If there wasn't something I was struggling with at the time, I would almost look for something to struggle with because it didn't feel right that I was happy, because I didn't feel that I was allowed to be in my own head. And that's very difficult, particularly when I do open up to anyone. As I have supportive friends, I have such a loving, supportive family at home that on paper, I shouldn't be feeling that way. And that made me feel so guilty. I thought people have it so much worse than me. I've got such an amazing support, an amazing family, incredible friends. Yeah, I'm feeling so low and feel very lonely. Like, you don't have to be technically alone to feel lonely. You just have to feel not understood. And that's my own responsibility to talk to those around me. And because I wasn't doing that, I felt that way. So if you feel that you don't deserve to be happy and then look for these quick fixes, like alcohol, for example, when I would drink, my speech would improve, my mood would improve. But obviously this would only last for a certain amount of time. And I was constantly looking for these quick fixes, these other people's validation, other people's approval. And I started seeking validation and approval from other people. And if I wasn't getting this regular validation, I would feel worse about myself. And you're stuck in that vicious cycle. And this went on years after I, found my speaking voice, really, just because I didn't address those emotions and I needed to, as I thought everything would be okay. But then I started to realize that it's not the stutter that has been putting me in a situation. It's how I feel about it. Like, having a stutter is only a bad thing if you make it a bad thing. And I think that's the bottom line there. Now I've made a stutter into, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I've made it into part of me that if I had the option to change right now whether I stuttered or not, I would not change it. It's got me to this point. It's who I am. But it was dealing with all those emotions that took so much more work, struggle, and hardship than dealing with a stutter. Even now, I still have insecurity which stem from those emotions growing up, but it's something I'm aware of and something I'm now working on.
You touched on a very good point, and this happens a lot, like when we're struggling with depression, anxiety, is when feeling guilty about the one time that you actually are happy, right? And that's because it's so unfamiliar to us, because we're constantly in that mode of feeling sad, feeling so depressed, and just kind of letting our mind take over with all these negative thoughts, that when you have these episodes or where you're having actually a good time and you're laughing, that you almost feel guilty, like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't familiar, I'm not supposed to feel this way. And then you go back to feeling the sadness again, because that's what's comfortable. Now, with all this mindset work that you did, what do you think was the biggest challenge for you to get through?
That's a hard question. I think there's a lot of challenges there, but I would definitely say that the biggest struggle, biggest insecurity I've always had is my self-worth. So just realizing that I am enough and I can achieve things in spite of my stutter. As I think I started relating every achievement to my stutter. Like, I did this and I got a stutter. I achieved this because of my stutter. But that was taking away the actual achievement. That was almost belittling what I actually achieved, because, again, relating back to that self-worth, I didn't feel worthy to achieve that off my own back. I felt like I had to have a crutch or an excuse of why I achieved it. So definitely trying to overcome that self-worth. That, I still have wobbles every now and again, but I think that's the same with anything. It's easy to say that you're done with mental health. Just because you're done with mental health never means that mental health is done with you. But just realizing that I am enough and I don't need other people's approval. I don't need external validation. I don't need the sort of the toxic validation from stuff like spending money and fancy clothes and alcohol to make me feel good about myself, really. And that's hard, because to get to that point, you have to feel all these vulnerable emotions. You have to make yourself purely vulnerable to talk to someone about what's going on, to talk to yourself about why you feel this way. And it's scary. Being completely vulnerable is scary, and you shouldn't need alcohol or other crutches to feel vulnerable. So definitely building up that level of self-worth has been the hardest thing, but it's still a challenge to this day. I will still have days when I query or question, but I know that these days are a lot more few and far between than they were, and I will keep working on it. And I got such great people around me that I can talk to them when I'm feeling this way. I know I have the support there. So definitely building up a support network and having people in place has helped, and a total amount.
Absolutely. That's always the toughest challenge anyone has, is realizing their own self-worth. And what I find is the second thing is challenging your mind to think differently, right? It's like telling yourself, okay, I am worthy, and your mind fights back and says, well, you're not, because that's what I've been telling you your whole life, that you're not. And then now you're presenting a new concept that's more positive. And at first, it's very strange when you first present it, and the mind will fight back, right? And will deny that, and will tell you other lies. It will tell you, well, you're just lying to yourself. You shouldn't say that. Look at your whole history. Look at all these examples of your life. And it gives you evidence too, right? It brings up evidence to show you that you shouldn't feel this other way. But it's that repetitiveness, right? You have to repeat that constant reminder that, I am worthy, and the actual lie was what I believed and lived all this life. And that was something I created. And that's the other thing, realizing that we created these thoughts and these beliefs, that it wasn't somebody that gave it to us. No one came up to you and told you, Callum, you're not worthy, that's why you stutter. It was something that you really created within yourself, that belief that wasn't true. And for a lot of people, reversing a false belief is the biggest challenge, the first challenge that they'll meet. And but once you get through that, then it becomes easier to get to the next step and the next step. Now, Callum, now you're doing wonderful things, which is you're going around and talking about this experience of yours on different podcasts. Now, tell us, what else are you doing to bring awareness into helping others that are going through the same type of struggles?
I think the most important thing when it comes to stuttering is to normalize it, as it's not normalized, whether that's on social media, TV, film. It's just not known, therefore it's not normalized. So I'm trying to sort of build a social media presence on, Instagram, YouTube, TikToks, just talking about my experience, talking about stuttering, answering questions about stuttering, normalizing things, just really trying to get the word out there as having a speech impairment like a stutter makes you reluctant to speak, never mind reluctant to speak about the stutter itself, and then you're trapped in that loop. So I want to speak out for the people who haven't found their voice yet, as there's so many people that are in the world. I think it's about either there's arguments where there's 1% of people or 3% of people. So we're a minority, but we're quite a large minority. So 1% of the population is still a lot. So I'm just really trying to raise awareness to get those messages on. I've always said if I can just help one person, if I can point someone in the right direction, if I can give hope to someone by saying I got a stutter and I'm doing everything I want to do, then that's enough for me. As put all the social media, the YouTube videos and TikToks to one side. I feel like as myself, training to become a teacher is scary for anyone. Never mind if you have a speech impediment on top of that. Just by doing the things that I want to do and chasing these ambitions and striving to achieve goals that I didn't expect I could or never imagined I could, it's raising awareness of stuttering, but I'm showing that I've got a stutter and look what I can do. But I'm also saying that my stutter doesn't define me in that sense. That I'm not a teacher with a stutter. I'm a teacher, and that's what I'm trying to get across. Your stutter doesn't have to define who you are, what you do. The life doesn't have to evolve around stuttering. That's why I'm just trying to raise awareness in any way I possibly can, really. And I really am enjoying what I'm doing.
And that's awesome, because this is actually going to help a lot of individuals that are struggling with the same issue to understand that they can get help, right? They can get help just like you did. And the most important help that they can get is the mindset, right? To really accept themselves and not let that get in the way of them achieving their dreams. You can still achieve anything that you want in life and not let this get in the way of it or make you any less than anyone else. And thank you for doing this and sharing your story with everyone and bringing awareness into the world. And I'm so proud that you're on this mission and helping others. So thank you so much, Callum, for sharing your story.
Well, no worries. I really appreciate you for giving me the time to share my story. This is what it's about. It's about making these networks and reaching out to each other and having this platform to speak. So I've really enjoyed talking to you, sharing my story. Yeah, so I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And please don't forget to share, to subscribe, and like the podcast so I could bring you more of these stories to you every week. So until next week,